Hello, I am Mark Crosswhite, and I'm happy to be presenting data which were predominantly sourced from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the National Youth Tobacco Survey regarding the youth use of nicotine and CBD THC containing electronic cigarettes. The main questions that I'd like to address during this presentation are: how can these data sets be used to help us figure out and plan for future trends, especially in light of past experiences? And in 2022, youth consumption rates increased. So is the panic over youth and nicotine ending or evolving? And lastly, how might youth cannabis use drag nicotine back into a harsh spotlight? The Center for Disease Control and Prevention is a federal agency whose mission is to protect America from health, safety, and security threats, both foreign and in the U.S. For about the last 25 years, the CDC has been conducting the National Youth Tobacco Survey to provide national long-term, intermediate, and short-term indicators key to the design, implementation, and evaluation of comprehensive tobacco prevention and control programs. Additionally, these data are used by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to compare progress towards the Healthy People 2030 goals. Since 1999, the National Youth Tobacco Survey questions have evolved to address an ever-changing tobacco use landscape. Initially, there were no questions regarding electronic cigarette use, but as that format increased in popularity, questions regarding electronic cigarettes were added. Partly based on the NYTS data, in 2018, the United States Department of Health and Human Services Surgeon General declared youth vaping an epidemic, following which state and federal agencies acted quickly to mitigate that epidemic. Interestingly, over the last few years, the survey questions are continuing to evolve, and now the CDC is including questions on the National Youth Tobacco Survey to collect data on the use of electronic cigarettes containing CBD and THC. In this presentation, I will use those data sets to show trends in tobacco-related electronic cigarette use leading up to the 2008 epidemic and compare some of those trends to current data in THC and CBD-related use. The CDC and other organizations do provide some ready-made data visualizations based on the NYTS dataset. However, they're generally for specific purposes chosen by the CDC and are not always applicable to address larger questions. For example, in this visualization, only high school students are included. We know that the NYTS dataset also includes 6th through 9th graders, so this particular visualization is missing an important part of the population. On this slide, I show the Youth Risk Behavior Survey Explorer for nicotine products. The data for a subgroup can be downloaded, and this is helpful in exploring the data from this survey. However, what we find is federal agencies generally seem to rely more heavily on the National Youth Tobacco Survey data than they do on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data when it comes to nicotine youth use. This may be partly because the Youth Risk Behavior Survey includes many risky behaviors, including cocaine use, alcohol use, etc. Here, I embedded a video, a screen capture, of a tool that I built to readily and easily evaluate the National Youth Tobacco Survey data. The idea here is to provide a tool that will allow individuals to get a big picture understanding of what's happening in youth use across various products and age demographics, gender demographics, sexual identity demographics, etc. In the next few slides, I'll show youth use of electronic cigarettes, combustible cigarettes, marijuana, and electronic cigarettes with CBD and THC using the National Youth Tobacco Survey data and the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. In these two data sets, there's the idea of current use. Current use is any youth who has used a product even once in the last 30 days, and ever use is any individual who has ever used that product. What we see for current use amongst youth for combustible cigarettes is a long-standing decline. What I'd like to contrast here is while combustible cigarette youth use has been declining, we saw electronic cigarette use amongst youth increasing up until the point of 2019, after the Surgeon General had declared youth use an epidemic. After which, factors including EVALI, COVID, and a great deal of public awareness on the issue has driven the youth use numbers down. The same trends are observed in the ever use category, with combustible cigarette use decreasing over the last 5 or so years, with electronic cigarette use growing and peaking in about 2019. And my point in this part of this presentation is to draw the comparison to marijuana use. In this federal report, marijuana use was touted to be at an all-time or at a near all-time low, a decades-long low, which is fantastic. Current use of marijuana amongst youth is down to about 15%. However, we're seeing the same trend with marijuana as we saw with cigarettes. Electronic devices with THC and CBD are steadily increasing. And so the question here is, are we repeating the same story with marijuana and electronic cigarettes with THC and CBD as we experienced with combustible cigarettes and electronic nicotine delivery systems? The next portion of this presentation shows several major categories of nicotine products and their current use data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey. What we see is, from 2021 to 2022, an increase in youth use in all of the categories, in combustible cigarette use, in smokeless, in electronic cigarette use, and in electronic cigarette use with THC and CBD. This is for the category of current use. We see the same trends in the category of ever use with combustible cigarette, smokeless, electronic cigarette, and electronic cigarettes with THC CBD categories increasing from 2021 to 2022. So there is potential that youth use of nicotine products is on the rise. Coupling this fact with the fact that electronic cigarettes with THC and CBD will soon rival youth use of electronic cigarettes with nicotine, and coupling this with the fact that often parents and school officials and even tobacco control groups have demonstrated that those product categories are confusing. And if you think about EVALI, which was a vitamin E acetate problem with THC and CBD vapes, which was definitely understood by the media and parents and many people to be an electronic nicotine delivery problem, we can see that generally these two categories, because their format is very similar, how they look, how they work, is very similar. There's a lot of potential for people to confuse the two products and the two product types. And so, given the fact that based upon current use data, which we only have 2 years of for electronic cigarettes with THC and CBD, we compare that with current use for electronic cigarettes with nicotine. And this is post-COVID, post-EVALI. We're seeing those trends increasing. And I feel like this has the potential to draw electronic cigarettes back into a spotlight that they will wind up sharing with electronic cigarettes with THC and CBD, which is probably not going to be where the nicotine industry wants to have its innovative, potentially harm-reduced products. So I think this is something that needs to be noted, and people need to be thinking about this as they develop strategies to communicate information on their electronic cigarette products. And so lastly, in my conclusion slide, I thought nothing says it better than a Far Side cartoon. And of course, I added the tobacco control and the most popular ends and the THC, CBD, and next generation ends labels to the characters here. But I think this really says a lot. We've got a narrative that with THC and CBD electronic cigarettes and marijuana that we've already seen play out with combustible cigarettes and electronic nicotine delivery systems. We've got youth use in nicotine products on the rise. We've got youth use in THC CBD products on the rise. And we have an almost equal amount of youth use for THC CBD products as we have nicotine products, nicotine electronic delivery systems. And so there's a real potential here for these two product categories to be commingled in the public eye, not differentiated, and for nicotine products to be drawn back into a negative spotlight. So that is the conclusion of this presentation, and thank you for your time and your attention.